It's theme week. It's theme week. It's theme week.
Hey Rebels, here's a little reminder for you if you're listening in real time. Next week, we will have not one, not two, but 3 episodes of the Sherpa Screening Room. And it will be a theme. It'll be I Was a Child Actor. We'll be hearing from 3 former child actors and about their movies and what they're doing with their lives nowadays. Hope you'll tune in. And if you're a new listener, please subscribe to the show. See you then. Thanks.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, he's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Hey there, Rebels, and viva la Sherpalution. Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. And of course, this week, we get to talk to a podcaster. Hey, what a big shock. My name is Jim, the podcast Sherpa, and let's keep count of how many times I can say the word podcast in this episode. Or if you made a drinking game out of it, you will be on the floor by the time this show is over. But that's okay. I hope you're enjoying the show anyway. And we are well into season 3. And if you haven't heard seasons 1 or 2, don't worry. You can hear those on your favorite podcast app or at my website, Sherpalution.com. Just a little reminder that before we meet our guest, today's podcast is being brought to you by Audible, and you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Now, I know what the first question is in your mind.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
Yes, that's right. I knew it. MGM, that's your answer. Michael Glenmore, better known as the host of a podcast called In a City Like Yours. And Michael interviews people from all walks of life with interesting life stories. He had actually asked me to be on his show, and like I think I'd mentioned in other podcasts, he'd asked me if I wanted to do this one, and I don't have a really interesting story. You know, I mean, we don't count like the bank robbery and the being confused with Brad Pitt all the time. I have a pretty boring life. But I got to interview him, and I found his story to be really fascinating, and he was a really great guy. We really had an enjoyable interview. So why don't we head on down to the conference room, and we'll check out my conversation with Mr. Michael Glenmore. Hey, everybody. We're here at the conference room at the Sherpa Chalet, and, podcasting is about stories. And, I love a good story. I think that's very evident if you listen to the show or if you follow me on social media at Sherpalution, but we can talk about that later because I have a guest here who does a podcast about people's stories. And this podcast is called
In a City Like Yours.
Yes. Please welcome Mr. Michael Glenmore. How you doing, Michael?
Hi, how you doing? Hey, everybody. Glad to be on the show.
It's an honor to have you, sir. All right, so you've been doing the show a little bit longer than this show. So what first got you into podcasting?
Well, I became interested in podcasts when I was listening to true crime podcasts. I became obsessed, and I listened to them, constantly every day. And there was a podcaster, Justin Evans. He did a podcast on the side called The Peripheral. And I really liked the concept of that. His guest, he had guests on that were taboo subjects, people who are into weird things, and that just really fascinated me. And after I listening to his podcast, that particular one, The Peripheral, I decided, well, I'm going to start my own podcast and do something similar. So my podcast does not deal with taboo subjects, but it does deal with guests who tell a story about something that happened in their life that changed them in some significant way, and so it just became its own thing as it grew. So now I'm pretty much done it for a year. I started February 2019, and it's now February 2020. It's been a year, and I think I've hit a stride finally. It took me a year, but once you hit that stride, you feel it. So I'm really excited about how it's doing.
Things all of a sudden fall into place, and sometimes like questions will just pop out of your mouth that you didn't even think of asking. It's like, hey, I just thought of that really good question.
Yeah, it's I'll let my guests go really tell their story before I start asking questions because it's a true story podcast. So they get into their story, then I'll start reacting to what they're saying. So you don't hear a lot from me in the podcast. And also I try in post-production, I try to edit out as much of myself as possible. It's really devoted to the guest. It's all about the guest. And I think your podcast is the same way.
Oh, yeah, very much. But since you are my guest, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So let me hear a little bit about your story.
Well, I am 58 years old, live in the South, Shreveport, Louisiana. Been here all my life. I am an artist, a painter and sculptor, which I've, done for many years. Recently, I've kind of gotten away from that and, focused most of my time on the podcast. So I'm not doing a lot of art at the moment. I do still consider myself an artist, and I hope to get back to that, at some point. I suffer from bipolar depression, which is a big, huge part of my life. And I try to be very honest about that and talk about it as much as possible, because I think there's a stigma around mental illness, and I try to do my part in lessening that if possible. So that's basically where I am.
How old were you when you first started getting into art and painting and sculpting?
Well, I was a kid when I started doing art. I remember doing finger painting, from way back when I was just, 3 or 4 years old. My memory goes back to that. So I, pretty much did some type of art from that point on. When I became a teacher, I started doing art professionally, and I became more serious about it. It took me until my teen years to really call myself an artist. I didn't consider myself an artist for the longest time. And then once I decided that, hey, I'm an artist, things kind of changed for me. I started viewing things differently and started creating my own style. The majority of my work that is public happened in my late 20s and forward. So I've got some images on my Facebook page, Michael Glenmore. You can just Google me or look up Facebook for Michael Glenmore. I have 2 photo albums of my art. So I send people that rather than having a website right now. I don't have a personal website other than my podcast, but that's where you can see my art.
That's really great that you had that kind of outlet, though, too. Did that help you when you were dealing with a lot of your bipolar? Were you very young when you dealt with this also, or did it kind of onset a little bit later on in life?
Well, I always suffered from depression from my high school days on forward, and I wasn't diagnosed as bipolar until I was 28. So it came kind of late, the diagnosis. And even after that, not diagnosed as bipolar, but started to discover that maybe I was bipolar. It took 10 years to really get that label and have a doctor say, okay, well, you're bipolar too. That's what is, going on with you. So now we can start looking at the medications that you need to take so that you can maintain yourself. So that's when I started taking antipsychotics and other antidepressants and mood stabilizers, which have really helped. So right now I'm kind of on an even kill because of my med list is the best it's ever been. So it's really worked out for me now. So I really, it's been a while since I've had a major episode. So that's, been a blessing.
Okay. That's good to hear. And I'm glad that you get to manage it, because I know some people it's really hard. And like you said, it is important to make people aware of that and not have a stigma attached to it, because it is manageable.
Yeah. It's not the end of the world. And, people, they hear bipolar and they think of schizophrenia, which is different. So they think bipolar being manic depressive or, as something. And they also they also miss with schizophrenia, thinking schizophrenia is like somebody who has 2 or 3 personalities, which that in itself is another diagnosis. So there's a lot of things in the mental health industry that people do not understand. And the only way they're going to come to understand that is if they hear people talk about their own personal experiences. So that's what I try to do, is make sure that, every chance I get, I talk a little bit about that.
You said it makes people feel they're a little less alone maybe in the world.
Definitely with me, when I started discovering my own mental illness and how to own it, I look to people for support who also were in that community, which really helped me.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your show, if we can. Did you have any favorite guests so far? I know you do the show twice a month. You got an easy pace going there.
I've had some really, really good guests. The one I'm most excited about right now is one that I just finished editing today. It's with Jack O'Halloran and Carmen Cardona. Jack, his father was the head of Murder Inc., the gangster syndicate. And he met his father later in his life. He didn't, know him from birth on, but when he was in high school, he finally met his father and they started a relationship. But he wrote a book called Family Legacy, which is fascinating, and his story is just incredible. And Carmine is an actor who did martial arts, when he was younger, and started doing films in martial arts. And he became a bodyguard at one point for other actors. And then he started doing kind of gangster films, or the wise guy type of role. And he's gotten pretty big in that. And a really, really good episode, I think. I'm going to release it this Sunday. So by the time this comes out on your show, it will already have been released. Look on my podcast for February, and it will show the Jack O'Halloran and Carmen Caradonna episode. Give it a listen and let me know what you think.
Sure. Actually, I just spoke to Carmine recently. As a matter of fact, he's going to be on the Sherpa screening room show.
Oh, well, cool. Yeah. So he's a great guy. I only got about 20 minutes with him, but it was a good 20 minutes.
Yeah, I really liked him too. He's a really down to earth guy. So yeah, I mean, he's one of those names that, people may not know him, but he'd be an interesting person to get to know. And at least, your show really gives people that kind of format.
Yeah, he goes into pretty depth about his drug use and things like that. So you get more of the feeling of the person rather than just the actor, because he was very honest about his struggles early on and where he went from there to where he is today.
And we were just talking earlier that you said you're liking having people from the entertainment world on your show because they've always got that interesting story tied to them.
Yes, and they love to talk. So that's, it's a good thing in the podcasting world if you get a guest who really enjoys talking. And as most actors, they train, so they're talking, what they say pretty much is clear. They're able to present their story in a clear manner because they're so used to playing a role and looking at it in a third person, looking back at, the role or looking back at themselves. So they know how to relate that to an audience. And it always makes it very interesting, I think. I get a lot of people who are not actors as well. I've interviewed novelists and comic book artists and painters and sculptors. And, had one girl, Rachel Stewart Haas, who is an astrologist, which was very interesting. And I've got an interview coming up in a couple of months with a woman who is a dream specialist. So I'm really looking forward to that. Something different that I haven't, covered yet.
Sure, it's always fun to delve into the different worlds. We like doing that on this show too. So let me ask you this. I'm going to put you on the spot. Out of people that you haven't spoken to yet, tell me 3 people that you would love to have on your show. I mean, if you could be anyone in this world, living, dead, any time in history, it's your choice.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I definitely would like a big name artist, something like a Basquiat or Andy Warhol. I know they've passed on, but I would love to have interviewed Basquiat. His work is incredible and something I really enjoy. And of course, Andy Warhol is very famous. People know who he is. He did quite a bit of, really nice work in pop art. And maybe in the actress realm, I would love to talk to Jessica Lange. She got her start with King Kong, and Jack O'Halloran was in that movie as himself. So he just reminded me the other day about how much I love Jessica Lange. So I would like to talk to her, and also Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, of course. These are individuals that very high profile that would be very interesting, I think, and would make a really, really good show.
And people that want to be on your show, if they've got a story, they can contact you.
Yes. My email address is michael@inacitylikeyours.com. You can reach me that way or through my Facebook. I have a Facebook group, In a City Like Yours podcast, on Twitter at IACLYS podcast. So, hit me up on social media, which is great, and or send me an email. If you go to my website, www.inacitylikeyours.com, I've got a page for guests to send me an email directly from my website. So, you can reach the website and also reach me through that.
Yeah, and you keep it nice and easy. Like I noticed, the flow of your show is you let your guests come on and they introduce themselves. They talk about their start in life, and then, like you said, that key element in their life that maybe steered them in a certain direction, and then you kind of jump in later and throw your questions at them. It's an interesting format.
Yeah, I like hearing stories of change, people who have changed in some significant way. That's either good or bad. And we get a lot of people who had difficult times in their life, and we get people who, or I get people who have changed in a positive way. Either the good or the bad, it usually leads to growth. And that's what I'm interested in, is how a person got from A to B and what happened in between. I like for my guests to start off as early as possible. If they can go back to their childhood and tell me a little bit about their history with their family and how that, affected them and made them, help them grow to who they are today. I really enjoy that when they go back that far. Not everybody does though. So, but, with the people who do, for some reason, for me, that's very rewarding.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about some of the interviews that we've done before we started recording. And I had mentioned that I interviewed Larry Hankin, who's a character actor, and he's been working basically from the 60s through today. He's still on a show that's on Netflix. And when he was telling me about his stories from the 60s, he definitely had like a rebellious streak. He was kind of a stand-up comic. And that still kind of carried through, like through all those different decades where he was always kind of finding something to rebel against. And I talked to him about that kind of rebellion. It's funny, like how certain things with you will stay with you through your life. So when they talk about their childhood, you can kind of pick up little things that doing a little foreshadowing, I guess, in their later life.
I just got a message that my internet connection was unstable. So I just want to let you know that in case that happens again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just babbling, so
No, you were good, but I didn't get to hear what you had to say. So
You'll have to wait till the show comes out now, Michael. Yeah. I'm not giving away any secrets.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. We know how it is on the interwebs, right?
I have to live through Comcast. That's all I can do.
We usually don't name names here, but that's all right.
You can edit that out in post-production.
Actually, I don't think, they don't carry service in Podcastia, so we don't have to worry too much about it. What is in the future for you? Now, I know you said you want to do more shows. Did you ever want to branch out and do other types, or just kind of stick with your podcast and get to know lots of different types of people?
Well, actually, I just started another podcast with a friend of mine, Scott H. Silverman, called Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour. He's a recovery specialist. He's, recovering addict himself after over 30 years of recovery, but he's is a specialist now, and he deals with families who are going through someone being in their life who's, has an addictive personality as far as medications or alcohol. Podcast is about, basically about addiction and education. And we've just released 2 episodes, got accepted to Apple Podcast today. So things are starting to pick up, and I'm really excited about that. It's called Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour.
So I didn't even know that. That was just a...
Yeah, I'm glad you asked.
You said you were a big fan of true crime podcasts. Were there any other types of podcasts that you like? That any ones that are your favorite?
I still listen to true crime a lot. I think I got started listening to true crime with, I can't think of the name, but Mike Baudet is the podcaster, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember the title. I guess I'm just nervous. But I still listen to the true crime podcast, and I tried to branch out and listen to other podcasts, and I've found one that I've kind of enjoyed. It's more of a comedy thing called The Basement Yard. It's pretty raunchy, but it's a lot of fun. So I've been listening to that quite a bit.
I had a guest on last season. They were husband and wife. The husband was the producer of the show, and his wife, Corina, did the show. It was called Morning Cup of Murder, and they did a 5-minute long true crime podcast, and it was great. They do a fantastic job on it. And 5 minutes, and they give you a whole chunk of information, and they try and keep the gore down to a minimum. They like presenting like the facts of everything, and really, really well done.
Yeah. Now, they say the sweet spot is 12 to 20 minutes because a lot of people listen to podcasts in their car as they drive to work. So the most popular shows a lot of times are the shorter ones. I've never heard of a 5-minute one. I'm not sure if I would listen to that because it wouldn't be enough time for me. I really like to binge on podcasts, and I like to go for the ones that are an hour or so. I don't even listen to a lot that are 20 minutes. Although the Scott H. Silverman Happy Hour is 20 to 30 minutes. Our first episode was an hour, but after that we're going to 20 and 30 minute format. Just because I like to binge. I like to listen to a podcast straight through all the episodes, and then I'll go to another podcast and listen to that straight through. Sort and Scale was the podcast I couldn't remember with Michael Boudet. So that was the one that got me started.
Okay. Yes, I think one of my other guests was a fan of that show too, as a matter of fact. Now that you mention it.
No, I was just saying it's very disturbing. Being my first podcast that I really listened to of any podcast, and it was just really affected me. I think that's why it's up there as one of my top favorites.
I listen to podcasts a little bit differently because I do the playlist thing where I do a whole bunch of different ones to kind of keep me occupied throughout the day rather than hearing the same one, one after another.
Well, I watch TV and binges too, so I'm used to having Netflix and watching a full series, in 2 or 3 sittings. So it's kind of my personality, I think.
Hey, that's okay. If you like the package deal, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, right?
Right. I don't think I'm alone either.
No, or else Netflix would probably be out of business if you were. We have this portion of the show, and we call it Shameless Self-Promotion.
Shameless Self-Promotion.
And this is where you can let everybody know about your show and if they want to reach you or follow you on your social media pages. So the floor is all yours, my friend.
Well, I pretty much have already mentioned the name of the podcast. You can reach me through the website, www.inacitylikeyours.com. Email me at michael@inacitylikeyours.com. And social media, Instagram and Facebook is In a City Like Yours Podcast, and Twitter is IACLYS Podcast. And I really enjoy doing the social media, and I love it when people contact me. So if you just want to say hi, listen to this podcast, Michael, and you were fabulous. But anyway, just kind of I'm really into people contacting me and chatting. I've gotten guests that way too. The woman I was talking about who is a dream specialist or talks, who's does dreams. I found her on Twitter. She contacted me and said, "Well, if you ever want a guest to talk about dreams, I'm your lady." And I wrote back immediately, "That would be awesome." And we set up a date. So I'll be interviewing her soon. That interview probably come out in the summer.
So you said that your artwork is also on your social media pages?
It's on my personal website, Michael Glenn Moore.
Okay.
So if you look up Michael Glenn, GLENN, Moore, MOORE, and you can find me. I'm the guy with the beard and the hat. I like to wear a bolo hat, so that's all my pictures have it in there. That's because I'm really. You have great hair. I have no hair, so it's you do what you can.
So, what days do your new episodes come out?
I release them on Sundays.
Okay.
So I usually do. I'll release them the first 2 Sundays of the month, and then if I have a bonus, will come out the 3rd Sunday or the 4th Sunday. But I like having the 2 weeks off so that I can prepare for other shows and other podcast episodes and edit and stuff like that. So, and with Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour, we release that on the first 3 Wednesdays of the month. It's a 3 a month show.
Right, he's going to be a busy guy, folks. But check out In a City Like Yours and the Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour. His name is Michael G. Moore. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
And now it's time for Sherpa Suggestions.
For this week's Sherpa Suggestions, I figured that since Michael Moore's podcast has to do with interviews, that I'd recommend a couple other titles to check out in addition to his podcast, In a City Like Yours. We have WTF with Marc Maron, Bobbycast, which is a podcast featuring Bobby Bones, Movie Crush with Chuck Bryant, where he talks to a lot of movie people about their favorite movies, The TED Interview with Chris Anderson, The Brian McCarthy Interview Show, and Bryant is a comedian, Love and Radio, Why Won't You Date Me with Nicole Byer, I guess you can figure what that one's about, 10 Things That Scare Me, and Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness. So just a nice little sampling of podcasts that you can check out if you're into the interview format. Now, I'm presuming that you must be because, well, this show is an interview show. Is that what we're calling it? An interview show? Yeah? Really? Wow. Is somebody going to give me a lesson in how to do an interview? Thanks again for listening to Too Many Podcasts, and we hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And a special thanks to Mr. Michael Glenmore. Don't forget to check out his podcast, In a City Like Yours. Oh, I hope you people aren't driving, because a lot of people are going to get pulled over today. Please don't drink and drive, rebels. Not advocating that at all. No. This is good for, the sanctity of your job when you can sit there and drink. That's better. What was I going to say? Oh, yes, you can follow me on social media at Sherpalution at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So if you can, please give us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher.com or iHeartRadio. Let people know about this podcast. We want lots and lots of listeners. And of course, feel free to share these episodes on your social media pages so people can check out what you're listening to. So, Mr. Bruce, if you can, please escort these esteemed people to the door. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?